What is your name?
My name is Vincent.
Where were you born and what year?
I was born in High Wycombe, Buckinghamshire, in England in 1933.
What is your first or most vivid memory that you have?
I think my first memory is probably when I was 6 years old and we had to go and try on a gas mask because of the war. And it was a vivid and horrible memory. Those things are horrible.
Can you describe the neighborhood that you grew up in?
Yes, I think they were relatively new homes in a very nice part of High Wycombe. All of the homes were pretty much the same. They were two-story brick homes. Every one of them had a very large garden, very big in the front and very big in the back. I remember that across the road, we lived on a hill, and across the road there was a great big enormous church, and it must have had 1,000 steps to get up there. I remember it was very beautiful, and right next to it were the woods, the forest, and it was very beautiful too. There was a milkman who came, and there was a man who brought green vegetables and fruit on a horse-drawn wagon that came by our house. There was an ice cream man that came on a cycle. He had a bicycle. There was a man who came to sharpen your knives, and he had a monkey that rode with him with a hat with a tassel. A red hat with a tassel, and he was a knife and scissor sharpener, and he would come by and sharpen all the knives in the neighborhood. There was a rag and bone man who would come and pick up your bones and your rags for recycling, and he had a cart. All of these were horse-drawn. Most of these were horse-drawn wagons. We're talking about the 1930s now.
Okay. Can you tell me about your parents?
Yes, I think for that particular time I had quite young parents. My dad worked in a furniture company, and my mother was a housewife.
Okay.
And
can you tell me how they met each other?
I really have no idea.
No.
I don't know. I know that my dad went to college, which was pretty unusual in those days, and that my mother was a dental assistant.
Okay.
That I don't know very much about them really as young people.
Okay. And what were their names?
My mother's name was Florence, but she liked to be called Bobby.
Okay.
And my dad's name was Leslie.
How did your family earn money when you were?
Well, as I say, my dad worked in a furniture company, and the name of it was Hull, Loseley and Pierce.
Okay.
And as far as I know, the store is still there. And anyway, that was what he wanted to do. He was interested in furnishings. He was interested in carpets. Mm-hmm. And in later years, he became the managing director of the largest wholesale carpet company in the British Isles. So whatever training he had stood him in good stead, you might say. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess he liked being an interior decorator, really. He loved beautiful things.
Now, did anybody else in your family follow in his footsteps?
Well, no, because I'm an only child.
Okay.
So there was nobody else to follow.
Okay. Do you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
When I was about 10 or 11, I wanted to go to work for Kew Gardens, which is the marvelous gardens in London where they name a lot of the flowers, and I wanted to, I guess you would say, be a scientist, although I didn't think of it that way at all. But once again, we're dealing with just beautiful things and beautiful huge greenhouses, and I thought that would be the ideal place to work.
Okay. What's different about growing up today from when you were growing up?
Well, I think that children were allowed to be children. They were expected to be children. And I think it was probably a lot better for them. I think they were much happier. I think today is very difficult for children of any age. And I don't think it's all that much fun, like some people think it is. I think a lot of the entertainment is so artificial that it's just not very much fun somehow. We were just happy with simple things. I mean, a child is pretty simple to begin with. You know, it's not very complicated. So, seems like it all goes hand in hand.
What was your graduation from high school?
Well, I graduated from Center High School in East Texas, and I was 15. My mother and I came over to the States in 1947 when I was 13, and I went to the school and I took the books that I had been studying, and since I had been brought up in a private school, they said that I had not only finished high school, but I had had 2 years of college. So even though I was only 14, they made me a junior, which was not a good idea at all, looking back on it, because I was not emotionally ready to be with 16 and 17-year-old kids, and certainly not as advanced as they are in the States. But that's the way it was. So,
can you tell me more about your experience during World War II?
Well, yes, I was 6 years old when the war started, and that was in 1939. And of course, everything changed. We had something called the blackout, which means that you had to have curtains over all of your doors and windows. You could never let any light shine because, you know, German planes could see it from above. You could never have a flashlight or anything like that outside. We were rationed stringently, but it was necessary. There were so many refugees pouring out of Europe that had to be taken care of. Everything was rationed. Coal was rationed. We could have a fire about 4 hours a day, so it was always in the evening. We'd light a fire about 6 and, you know, enable it to burn until about 10. Well, actually, of course, I was put to bed earlier, but it seemed to me as though we were always very cold, because England is a cold country anyway, and without very much heating, it was cold. It was cold all the time. I think the coldest I remember was like 8 below, which some people don't feel the cold, but I do. I don't like cold weather very much. Sometimes we would go up to London and we would see the results of the bombings. Sometimes you'd go, and the next time you went, a week or two later, that building would be gone. There would be nothing but the huge, you know, crater. Sometimes when we were in London, the air raid warnings would go off and we would go down into the underground, because that's where everybody went during a raid. I think that Germany bombed us, I understand, 147 days in succession, trying to bring Britain to heel. And we were bombed round the clock. It wasn't just at nighttime and it wasn't just at daytime. You didn't know when you were going to be bombed. My grandfather, one of my grandfathers, drove an ambulance during the war at night and was decorated by King George VI after the war for his efforts during the war. It's very strange because even though it was wartime, everything just went on. It wasn't like they ever closed down a school or anything like that. Everybody just behaved as though it was supposedly normal, which, looking back on it now, I think was just amazing that the British people carried on the way they did and lived as normal a life as possible, you know. Yeah. And of course we were bombed too, so. And there would be what we call dogfights at night. The Spitfires and Messerschmitts, they would be having, you know, fighting in the sky over us, and we were bombed. I mean, it was, It was hard to be normal, but I think we were as normal as it's possible to be during a very abnormal time and a very frightening time. My godmother was missing. We never knew what happened to her. She was in a bombing raid. We didn't know whether she was killed or whether, like so many people, she had amnesia and just wandered off for another life. We never heard. We never heard what happened to her. Things were just not normal, as you can imagine. It was a very frightening time. And of course there were long queues for food. We had to queue up for everything. And we're very grateful for what we had. We really were. It was a very difficult time. And besides that, most people don't realize that the rationing went on for 10 years after the war. It was ended in March of 1954. So all the people in England were rationed all those years, even though the war ended in 1945. So England was just brought to its knees, as was all Europe. It was just, so much was destroyed that we knew and we loved. And
can you tell me about the pets that you have?
oh, well, I think everybody in England loves dogs, you know. We always had a cat. Although at one time my mother had a dog, a Scottie, and he didn't like anybody but my mother. He was certainly a one-person dog. But my grandparents had a beautiful black spaniel called Billy, and they lived about a mile from the bus stop. And for some reason, Billy would go down and get on the bus and would ride to, I think it was called Barksdale Army Base. This was a British, not an American camp, but a British camp. And apparently Billy would go and stay there for about 2 weeks. And then he would catch the bus and he would come home. And everybody, this was from a very small village to another small village. And everybody knew Billy and was not at all surprised that there was a dog riding a bus. It sounds so unlikely, but it really happened. It really did. And he would catch the bus at Hare Street. That was the name of the street. And ride to Barksdale. Yeah. He was a beautiful dog. He was black and in the sun he shined blue. He was so beautiful. And of course that was the time, you know, there was no such thing as dog food and cat food. Most people don't understand that. But dogs and cats ate what we ate. And on a Sunday or any other day, you would make the plate for the dog, just like you would. I remember my Nana, you know, she would put the meat on the plate and the mashed potatoes and the vegetables and pour the gravy over the top, and this would be Billy's lunch. He ate this one, and if we had whatever we had for breakfast, you know, a piece of leftover toast, that's what you fed animals in those days. There was no such thing as dog food and cat food. This is a whole new industry. I mean, they eat what we eat, and it's really better for them than all this rubbish that they get today, if I may say so.
You may.
So many things are so different. So from England to America, can you tell us about coming to the United States?
Oh, yes. My mother was a war bride, which means, of course, that she was divorced and married an American serviceman. And my mother had leased our house because you had no idea when you would get a berth on a ship to come over. So we moved into a hotel, and I think we stayed there probably for maybe 6 weeks until we got the notice that there was a berth on a ship coming to the United States. And this was the Mauritania, which was the sister ship to the Queen Elizabeth. And it was a luxury liner, and during the war it was converted to a troop ship. But after the war, it was converted back to a luxury liner, and this was going to be its maiden voyage to New York. And it was truly a beautiful ship, and a very interesting passage, and a lot of excitement with people coming to the States. In my autograph book, I have a signature by Douglas Bader. You probably don't know who that is, but he was a very famous aviator in Britain, and he had been captured by the Germans twice and escaped twice, and he lost both of his legs. And anyway, I have his autograph because he was on the ship coming to the United States. Anyway, we arrived in New York on May the 2nd, 1947. And getting into a car and driving the other way and having all the cars come at you is a very strange sensation. It was terrifying. Anyway, I remember that very clearly. We stayed in Bogota, New Jersey. It was a very, very, the cousins of our next door neighbors in England invited us to stay with them. So it was very nice. And we went to the Statue of Liberty, of course. And I will say that seeing the Statue of Liberty from a ship is very exciting. It's very moving. You have people standing crying on the ship. Yeah.
When you arrived in Texas, were there any culture shocks?
Everything was a culture shock. Everything was. It really was. And it's not like it's anybody's fault. I mean, people live the way they do. But, you know, people from one street to the next live differently. People next door to you live differently. So from country to country, it's... And the time, of course, it was amazingly different. 1947 was light years away from the way the world is today. Really. Just amazing. And besides that, I was used to living in a town and being very familiar with London and the restaurants and the beautiful theaters and things like that. And we came to the country, 9 miles back down a dirt road, no bathing facilities, no bathroom, a shack out in the back, snakes. Culture shock, to say the least. And even the language, of course, was so different. So many people I didn't understand, and they didn't understand me. It must have been hilarious, except it really wasn't.
What was your first job?
My first job was in a cafe. My mother got me a job in a cafe in Center, and I was 14. And once again, that was a culture shock because of the food being so different. And I can remember one day a man came in and he wanted pie, and I gave him a spoon, and he asked for a fork. Well, in England we eat pie with a spoon and a fork. But I had just given him a spoon, I don't know why. But and then after that I worked, anyway, that was the KB Cafe. And Center, this little town, it was the county seat of Shelby County, with the courthouse in the center. And then all these little buildings were around it. And the KB Cafe was one of those buildings. And then after that, when I started school, I worked for another cafe called the Pine Burr. And when I learned to type, I used to go in the morning and type the menu. And I have to say it was all very strange, but I had to do it. I didn't like it very much. I didn't like it at all, as a matter of fact. But anyway, one does what one can do. And of course, at that time, the man whom my mother was coming to marry thought that she was selling everything and bringing her money over here and was going to put him in business. But at that time, you could not bring money out of England. You could only bring £50. And £50 is not very much money at all. So you had to, and another thing, coming over here in those days, you had to be sponsored. Somebody had to be responsible for you. There was no government handouts. There was nobody giving you a Social Security card and Medicaid and all this sort of thing. You had to be responsible for yourself, or someone else had to be responsible for you. The government wasn't going to support you. And so hence I had to get a job, and my mother had to too, because needless to say, the marriage did not last more than like 3 weeks. And actually we had to get some neighbors to help us get out of the situation we were in. They took us away in the night so that we could leave where we were. It was not very good.
So when and how did you meet your spouse?
Then I went to night school because we worked 6 days a week then and no overtime. And I decided I wanted to work 5 days a week like my friends so that I could go to the beach on Saturday and not have to work. So I went to night school and took a secretarial course. And I got a job in a place that sold great big huge refrigerators for grocery stores. And I'm trying to remember what they called them in those days. Oh, they called them a gondola, a great big huge open refrigerator. And after that I got a better job working for an oil company, and that was when I met my husband, with whom I had 4 children, and with whom I lived until he passed on 11 years ago.
What type of hobbies or special interests do you have?
Oh, I love reading, and I love gardening, and I love seeing beautiful things, and I love my friends, and I guess that's it. Enjoy my children, my grandchildren. Are those hobbies?
What have been the most influential experiences in your life, if you can kind of condense them, I guess, 'cause that's a broad question.
Most influential? Well, I think living through a war has a huge influence on you. I think coming to the States was, I mean, I was 13. A child of that age is very impressionable. I don't know. I guess just those things, you know. And I'm always impressed by how the world is changing. It's changing momentarily around us, and some of us are running to keep up, and some of us don't want to keep up. Some of us would just assume live back in a quieter time.
Okay, what were your thoughts about the Beatles?
The first time I saw them on Ed Sullivan, I just thought they were dreadful. All of that energy and jigging up and down, and but later, now I think they're absolutely wonderful, and the songs that they wrote are just very moving, very, very beautiful. But at that time, since I was brought up in a very classical and sort of a quiet life, they were just rowdy and bumptious, and I don't know, I couldn't comprehend them. The fact that they were British, they weren't all stiff and, you know, stiff upper lip and all that sort of thing. They were totally wild.
So who did you like to listen to?
Well, I used to like Julie Andrews very much, and I love Frank Sinatra, and Johnny Mathis was a favorite of mine. I loved Peggy Lee, and of course you probably don't remember the Andrews sisters. They were popular during the war. They were very good, very, very good. And there were lots of groups like that, you know. But I thought that the Beatles were just so boisterous. But they were young and, you know, and having a wonderful time. So I think they did some good things.
What advice would you give for the young people of today?
The only advice I would give anybody at any age, at any time, is unto thine own self be true.